And a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 88 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Thursday, early evening here in New York with me. If you're checking out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, and are enjoying the content, click like, subscribe, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you're catching this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. If you're enjoying the content, click like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. So a bit of a dichotomy is, despite my academic background, despite the fact that I graduated with honors from New York University, my degree was in cinema studies, which means that I've watched a lot of movies, studied a lot of movies, written papers about a lot of movies you've never heard of. Some movies don't even really exist anymore. They're in truncated formats because they were from the first quarter of the 20th century. They're rickety, mostly destroyed. Still studied them. I can break a film down a lot of different ways. I can tell you, because a character is wearing a certain kind of shirt in the first act relative to the third act, I can tell you what that means. I never liked doing that. I want to be entertained. Are you not entertained? Like anybody else. I really just want to be entertained. But with all the high-minded shit and some of the things that I talk about on here, some of the old movies and filmmakers that admittedly aren't necessarily so familiar to younger people, it's easy to think that I am nothing but a kind of film snob. And in this instance, film snob is not really as much of a criticism as it probably sounds. I don't look down upon any genre of film. That's what I'm trying to say. So as much as I can psychoanalyze a film by Alfred Hitchcock. I can psychoanalyze Blue Velvet. Hell, I could psychoanalyze what exactly was George Lucas doing in episode 4 if he always intended for Luke and Leia to be brother and sister. Like, what the fuck? Am I right? Or am I right? Isn't it a little weird? You get like, geez, what the hell are you doing, George? Well, because I don't think that he had entirely figured it out yet. But the upshot of all of this, if you ask me, what is my favorite genre of movie? In general, if I'm just going to sit down and somebody who maybe, let's say they actually know more about movies than me, they say, you're going to watch one movie from a particular genre that is a classic that you've never seen. It could be any time through history. What genre? I'm probably going to say action. And they say, be a little bit more specific. Okay, action thriller. Suspense. How's that? That would be my favorite genre. So when I talk about a certain movie that I love, but it's also trash, if I'm entertained, I'm happy. Whereas, if I have to sit through a 1960s foreign film where there is no plot movement from A to B to C, I'm talking about you last year at Marienbad, Alain Resnais, rest in peace, a French master, but I had to watch that movie 3 times. I was told this is a great movie. Muriel, another film by Alain Resnais. What do you think? I think that if you wanted to engage in nonviolent torture of political prisoners, you would force them to watch Last Year at Marienbad in an endless loop. And it is worse than anything you could ever do physically. That would be throw them in a sensory deprivation tank and just leave them there. That would be preferable to sitting through Last Year at Marienbad. Because I watched the movie 3 different times. And I remember every minute of each of those experiences. Oh, it's good for the soul. Look at the geometric frame composition. Hey, fuck you and your geometric frame composition. I'm not stupid. I know what I'm looking at. Ooh, pretty pictures. I want to be told a story. Just like every other movie fan. I'm not interested in, well, did we meet here? Or maybe we met that time. Or maybe it was some other guy. Or maybe it was some other woman. In the immortal words of Woody Allen in Manhattan Murder Mystery, who knew they were flashbacks? who knew they were flashbacks. I didn't care. By the point of the movie where you knew they were flashbacks, I didn't give a shit. I'd like a movie that moves from plot A to B to C. You have a nice structure. It doesn't have to be precisely 3 acts, but set up, conflict, more conflict, false resolution, actual resolution, roll credits. So some of my favorite action movies are not good movies, and some of them are great movies. So if I throw some out at you, and as we say, some of the younger people are probably not familiar with action classics, let's say of the 80s and 90s, because it's before your time. And I get that. And in this instance, I'm not a film snob. I don't ever assume, even when somebody tells me I'm a big movie fan, I don't assume that they've seen all of the standards and all of what would be considered classics by people such as myself, mid-range Gen Xers, young boomers, elder millennials. But one of my all-time favorite action movies from the 1970s is a film I briefly referenced yesterday. And it's an adaptation of William Goldman's book, Marathon Man, and the movie is called Marathon Man. Now, that's a film that is a suspense thriller, and it is an action film. Dustin Hoffman's main character is constantly in motion. He almost never sits still, kind of like the real Dustin Hoffman. Now, that's a role, if Hollywood had played things out differently, if Sylvester Stallone had hit earlier, he would have been a perfect choice for the main character of Thomas Babington Levy, or Babe, a graduate student at Columbia who gets involved in this insane plot involving old Nazis returning to this country, to America, not even returning, showing up here to try to collect some ill-gotten gains. But that's a kind of a movie that is action, but it is high-minded. It's from a literary property. So does it make it a better action movie if it has a big cast of Oscar-winning type of talent, where in that film you had Lord Laurence Olivier, future Oscar winner and multiple Oscar winner, and Dustin Hoffman, and you had a terrific Roy Scheider and William Devane. Oh, William Devane. There's an under the radar name that every movie he's ever been in, he's great. Even Space Cowboys with Clint Eastwood. Like, Clint went out of his way to cast him because he knew that he was just going to chew it up. Every scene, William Devane in Space Cowboys, he actually takes the movie away from Clint. When he's on screen, he's all you see. He's that kind of performer. He does it in Marathon Man, a great action movie from a book that was a huge bestseller and got all kinds of acclaim. The movie is, maybe it's not as good as the book, but it's close. But I make no judgment. That's a movie from 1976. Maybe it's not as good as Rocky. It's not as good as Taxi Driver. But it's also a story of a very gritty, hard-bitten New York, as is Taxi Driver. There are certain shots in the films that aren't that much different, even though the movie is pitched at an entirely different angle. But it is an action movie. And that's a film, even though it's some pretty heavy shit, I've probably seen that film, and I read the book first. That's an example of an adaptation that got it right, because the adaptation of that book it's really close. It's almost the same. It's 75+% of the book. There are certain things that Goldman couldn't do simply because it's a book versus a movie. You can introduce 2 different characters in a book, but if they're the same person in a movie, what are you going to do, right? Roy Scheider's character in the movie, we know who he is. We know he has an alias. In the book, we think it's 2 different people. And a moment in the book when we realize, holy shit, this is not 2 people, this is one guy, boom. That's the kind of lightning bolt moment that you can only get in fiction. But I'll give you some more of my favorite action films. And the genres often cross. For example, the original Terminator with Arnold, 1984. It's science fiction, right? Time traveler from the future, time traveling robot from the future. Sarah Connor. It's an action movie, right? It's an action movie. People used to get hung up trying to classify things almost like a sort of purity. Is it pure action? What the fuck is the difference? Is it a good movie is what's important. That's a great action movie from the 1980s, even though it has science fiction. Now, I would say that something like Star Wars is science fiction first. There are action elements. There's a lot of suspense. There's thriller elements. There's even some mystery. Darth Vader's who? Luke's dad. Spoiler! Oh my God. Oh my God. I just gave it away. In the immortal words of Gilbert Gottfried, one of the great bits in the history of stand-up comedy, and I don't even like Gilbert Gottfried for the time, late 80s, gets on stage and he goes, "I saw the last temptation of Christ. He dies at the end. Oh, I spoiled the movie." He dies at the end. I would argue that Terminator 2 is a better action movie than its predecessor, first Terminator, and a better science fiction film. Mostly because James Cameron had a bigger budget to work with, he was able to do different things. Speaking of James Cameron, Aliens is another movie that blends numerous genres. And that's fine. Aliens is a war movie. You got Marines. Usually they would be taking on somebody from other countries. In this case, they're taking on fucking aliens. Like, literally. That's the most on-the-nose title of a movie ever. But why is the first one called Alien? Ridley Scott, 1979. Why is the first one called Alien? Well, it's a ship from Earth that's, there's a stowaway, there's a mistake, and, it's not really a stowaway. They have to fight an alien. Oh, literal, yeah. Well, what about aliens? They're fighting a lot of those aliens, hence the title of the movie. But aliens. Somebody comes to me and said they consider it a horror film, fine. Genre classifications are not absolute. This is not a big deal. Even in film school, even if you're in Columbia's film program right now, if any professor is trying to get you to narrow it down, you can narrow it down all you want. There's no right answer. What the hell's the difference? I always thought of Aliens as an action movie, but technically it's a horror film. Technically it's a war film. It's science fiction. It's all of those things. What it is one of the best movies ever made. Another hill that I'll go down on. That is James Cameron's best film. And you're talking to somebody, or you're listening in this instance to someone who loves first Terminator, Cameron's director's cut of The Abyss, absolute masterpiece, love it. Huge fan of True Lies, love Titanic. I Need You to Swim, Rose. Swim. Aliens is his greatest achievement, either version. And that's an instance where there is a theatrical cut and director's cut. And I don't get angry at people who tell me, well, I prefer the theatrical cut, even though that's not really the movie that Cameron was trying to make. The film was running long. It's the reason why Rupert Murdoch, this is not a knock on Rupert Murdoch, the 1988 version of Rupert Murdoch, he sat with James Cameron and watched The Abyss, which is a science fiction film, but there's a shit ton of action. So that is sci-fi action. But Rupert Murdoch sat with James Cameron and they watched a 3-hour The Abyss. And Murdoch said words to the effect of, "This is an incredible film, but it's just too long. We can't release a 3-hour movie in summer. We need to get more people in seats. We need more screenings a day." It's like a economics multiplier accelerator type of an argument that Murdoch made. So Cameron, he didn't have final cut. He understood where Rupert was coming from. He cut about a half hour out of his movie. The restored version of The Abyss, I would argue, is on par with Cameron's other masterpiece, like great movies. And I don't really like Avatar. But Terminator 2, many people, certainly many Gen Xers, will say, no, that's his best film. I won't quibble with that. But for me, every single scene in Aliens, in either cut, I prefer the longer cut where you learn that Ripley had a daughter. I think it works. There's a little bit more shading to Paul Reiser's character. And the fact that we get to see the planet before everything goes sideways, it takes away from the suspense, but it gives us more information. Those are all movies that I would classify as action movies that I absolutely love. Now, you want to talk old school. Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry. Although there had been movies made in that era like Steve McQueen's Bullitt, Gene Hackman's French Connection. This was the first movie of its kind. You're never going to get asked this question, but if somebody says to me, Jared, what is the first R-rated action thriller that Hollywood put out? The way that you see these things. That's my answer. This movie, in an hour and 41 minutes of running time, it is wall-to-wall violence. Harry Callahan, the San Francisco homicide inspector, played so beautifully by Clint. You know, it's because the movie is held in high esteem, National Film Registry, one of the great films of the 70s. It's easy to overlook what Clint does with that role and that performance. But he's in almost every scene, and he's just fantastic. It's a movie star masterclass. I've talked about in the Silence of the Lambs podcast that what Anthony Hopkins does with the character of Hannibal Lecter, in very little screen time, he puts on a masterclass. And remember, Anthony Hopkins was a theater performer. He puts on a masterclass in film acting. Clint Eastwood in Dirty Harry, I've probably seen Dirty Harry 20 times from start to finish, no exaggeration. I studied it in explicit detail. Clint Eastwood gives a masterclass in how to be a movie star. He was 40, going on 41 when the movie was shot. And his cool, his calm, his rage, but every note that he hits in the film, it's like he's taking the pulse of the audience. That's not something that's so easy to do. There are moments in that film where his character does things that to certain people in the audience, seeing it now especially, they're going to feel a little betrayed. This character is not exactly what we thought he was. He's a man who has an awful lot of integrity, but there are certain things that if they don't make sense to him, he really doesn't give a shit about the letter of the law. He's going to follow his own code. Code of the gladiator, code of the warrior, and that's why this movie has been called an urban Western, as was Taxi Driver in its own way. But this is an action movie. Yeah, it's a cop film, subgenre. Maverick cop film, a sub-subgenre, including Sylvester Stallone's Cobra, which is not nearly as, it doesn't say as much about society. Cobra says a lot about society. It says a lot about what it must have been like being in California during the time when Ronald Reagan was president. I don't know that Cobra is necessarily saying, hey, Reagan's president. But movies are not made in a vacuum, is the idea. And Dirty Harry, as an action film, which you can just watch and enjoy, it hits all the right buttons. It manipulates the audience beautifully. It plays you like a violinist, basically. It does everything right in an action movie. It sets up a very formidable hero. It sets up a formidable villain. And then it sets up a bureaucracy that might be even worse than the villain. I mean, who loves bureaucrats, right? Another great word, bureaucrat. Bureaucrats, bureaucracy. There's a lot of bureaucracy in Dirty Harry. It doesn't mean that people are corrupt. They're not presented as corrupt. They're presented as incompetent, ineffectual, or so worried about getting sued that we can't let him do this. Well, Clint's final solution is to give the double middle finger salute to bureaucracy and say, you know what? It's for the greater good. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. In this case, Inspector Harry Callahan. Son of a bitch, kidnapped a bunch of kids. He hijacks a school bus and he wants to go to the airport and fly away like Lenny Kravitz in the song, I Want to Get Away. That ain't happening. Not on my watch. You want my shield? Here it is. You ain't getting my gun, not till this is over. He doesn't say that, but it's implied. So he goes off, he does his thing. Let the chips fall where they may. And there is a history of the lone male hero in these kinds of action movies. And I appreciate that. James Bond. Think about how many Bond films, the weight of the world is on James Bond's shoulders. Society is minutes from blowing up. And what does James Bond do? Well, normally he beds the hottest available woman for first thing. And the other thing is he orders martinis. Nero fiddles while Rome burns. James Bond orders a martini and looks to hook up with the hottest woman that he sees. Pussy galore. Oh, I must be dreaming. But he never cracks under pressure. He stays the course. And he's not doing that because he doesn't care. Everything seems to be for effect. I like when movies, and great movies in the genre of action specifically, when they do something different. And another movie I'm going to talk about, a movie very well remembered by young boomers and Gen Xers, among others, I'm sure, Face Off. What does Face Off do that's different to the kind of movie I've just described, the kind of classic Hollywood actioner? It's got two heroes. It's not normally done. Two heroes, two villains. Each actor plays a hero, plays a villain, depending on what point of the movie we're at. John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. Random trivia. Originally, it was going to be Michael Douglas and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Can you imagine that movie? Boy, that would have been fucking hysterical. Michael Douglas in Arnold Schwarzenegger's body. Look at the size of my arms. I got huge arms. Kind of like if Arnold was going to play Dr. Octopus, making jokes about how big his arms are. But Michael Douglas attempting to do Austrian accent, I don't even know how that would have worked, to be honest with you. Arnold ended up not being part of the film or the production, but Michael Douglas produced Face Off. But that's a movie. John Travolta's character is a good guy, and Nicolas Cage's character is the bad guy. They swap consciousness, more or less. It's science fiction. There you go. It could be argued that Face Off is first and foremost a science fiction because it deals with science that doesn't exist. It is a fictitious science narrative. Movie was made in 1996. We are probably hundreds of years away from the science that is in that movie. I want to take his face off. The way that Nicolas Cage, off. John Travolta's the good guy. Nick Cage is the bad guy. And then they swap consciousness. And now John Travolta is an FBI agent who thinks like the world's most dangerous criminal, and the world's most dangerous criminal now thinks like an FBI agent. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Maybe the best action movie of the 90s. And a big part of that, yes, having those great actors and Joan Allen as the wife who isn't sure who's who. You know, we've been living as husband and wife for a week. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Ooh, she's had sex with him. Well, he looks like John Travolta. It's not really, well, it is him, but it's not him. You know, that kind of thing. Face Off is fantastic. 1997, you know, that was the year of Titanic and LA Confidential and Adam McGowan's The Sweet Hereafter, As Good as It Gets with Jack and Helen Hunt, you know, Oscar winners. And Contact, Jodie Foster, Matthew McConaughey, all right. I think you got to believe in God. I think I need to take my shirt off. He never actually says I need to take my shirt off. But early in the film, when he and Jodie get it together, he has his shirt off. But 1997, Face Off is one of the best movies of the year. I don't say, well, it's just an action movie. It's got wacky science fiction elements. I saw Face Off in theaters, and I was fucking blown away. It wasn't just it's a fun action movie. No, it is a great movie. And to say that something is one of the best action films ever made, it's not a criticism. Not at all. Die Hard, 1988. Lone male hero takes down terrorists. It's a James Bond story set in a high-rise office building. Nakatomi Plaza. What makes that different is it's not a superhuman, although, to be honest, John McClane is kind of superhuman, but he's not presented as even as tough as a Dirty Harry. And Clint Eastwood was one of many people who was at least approached in the early stages of what became Die Hard. I love Clint. I'm glad he didn't do it. Because like the Clint Eastwood of the Heartbreak Ridge era, the movie's not as good. It needed a seemingly vulnerable hero. If you just have Clint throwing off one-liners with a .44 Magnum, although to see him play off of Alan Rickman would have been great. You know, Alan Rickman makes a threat. Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy? I piss napalm. Punk. Die Hard, one of the greatest action movies ever made, and a great movie. It's just a great movie. It's not just a great action movie. But I guess the idea is, for me, personally, action movies have the rewatchability factor. We remember certain memorable scenes. Hell, the Indiana Jones trilogy. Some of Steven Spielberg, the OG trilogy, the movies made in the 80s, I mean. It's some of Spielberg's finest work. And Raiders of the Lost Ark, there are people, and I can remember in film school, but there are people to this day that say that it should have won the Oscar for Best Picture. That's an action movie, it's suspense, it's got laughs, it's old school. It's a lone male hero saving the day. Does this sound familiar? That's an action movie. Historical, because it's set in, I think, was it 1939, 38? The original. And then Temple of Doom it's a prequel, even though it came 3 years later. Indy is supposed to be a little bit younger. I mean, Harrison looked great. They didn't do any real makeup tricks or anything like that. But I love all three Indiana Jones movies. And I could talk about the historical, some of the connotations in there. Some of the shtick in the second movie, Spielberg is a little uncomfortable with now. And then that's where you have Quentin Tarantino, arguing, no, Steven did a great job. He did a great job. That's my favorite of the originals. I don't like Last Crusade. I love Temple of Doom. I love it. It's exactly what he says. Now, he doesn't get angry because Spielberg said, I don't think that I did Temple of, or I wouldn't do it that way if I were making that movie now. And Tarantino, almost half jokingly, as excited as he gets, no, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I never found Last Crusade interesting. I love Sean Connery. I don't love the character. It's boring. The movie's not that good. They are almost pure action movies. The rewatchability factor of all three of the original trilogy, through the roof. Crystal Skull, not so much. I feel like that and The Lost World, the sequel to Jurassic Park, the two weakest films, Spielberg films that I'm, comfortable talking about. 1941, the film he made in the late 70s, which it has its defenders. I've only seen bits and pieces of it. The two weakest Spielberg films that I've seen are both action movies, although again, Lost World, you could call it science fiction. Obviously, there is an element of science fiction in Jurassic Park. That science doesn't exist. You can't take sap from a tree that has a mosquito that bit a dinosaur in the Paleozoic era or Mesozoic era, and hey, we're going to grow some dinosaurs. Science fiction. Action movies. There's no reason. See, this is one of the best things about being a film school graduate, in my case, and somebody who people know. People, for example, who knew me at the gym would always joke about me being Google before Google, that I knew movies. When you're a kid, when you're in your teens, and all you want to do is watch action movies, and people just, why don't you watch something else? Well, I don't want to watch something else. You've seen Die Hard 10 times. Well, I'll see it 11 times. Action Jackson, which I talked about last week, and Die Hard existed on the same VHS tape with what movie? The Lost Boys. That was a tape that got played almost to death. That tape was always in the old Panasonic VCR at the old house in Massapequa, because those three movies I could watch again and again and again. Now, Lost Boys is a vampire movie, but it's also an action film. There's a shit ton of action, wall-to-wall violence in The Lost Boys. Few laughs. Burn rubber does not mean warp speed. You know the rule about filling up the car with gas when you take it without asking? No, Grandpa. Well, now you do. The upshot of today's episode is, whatever genre of movie you enjoy, don't let film snobs tell you, you should try something else. It's okay to try something else if you want to. You know what you like. If you love anime, that's all you got to watch. Do I really look like I'm going to judge you because you're a huge fan of My Hero Academia? No. I never got into Miyazaki, Howl's Moving Castle. Never got into those movies. You want to watch those? Go right ahead. You want to watch nothing but horror movies? Go ahead. You want to watch nothing but science fiction? Go ahead. I like my action movies. I can debate greatest westerns, and I can compare and contrast The Searchers to Unforgiven, or The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly to Red River. I can debate the stylistic techniques of Sergio Leone in the Dollars trilogy versus Quentin Tarantino in Django Unchained. Sergio Leone is Quentin Tarantino's favorite filmmaker. It's a little trivia for you. But ultimately, movies, when we sit down to watch a movie, we want to be entertained. I don't sit down to watch a movie for intellectual enlightenment very often. Now, sometimes a movie will give you intellectual and spiritual enlightenment and enrichment. Chariots of Fire, my all-time favorite movie, a period piece, a historical piece, the kind of movie that I'm basically talking against in this episode. You don't need to do that. Well, I was taken to this movie kicking and screaming as an 8 or 7. I wasn't even 8, I was 7. And my parents didn't give me a choice. You don't really have autonomy when you're that age. If the parents say, get in the fucking car, we're going to the movies. I don't want to go. Well, you got 2 choices. And they both end with you getting your ass into the car, Jer. Okay, sorry. Don't apologize, get in a fucking car. But this movie, a sports film, a period piece, a biographical narrative about actual historical figures. That movie, Chariots of Fire, at the end, I felt enormous spiritual and intellectual enlightenment. And I was curious to learn more about the true story. But it all falls under the heading, the magic of motion pictures. And it's a debate that the late film critic who I adored, Roger Ebert, often had with gamers. He played video games, he enjoyed them, but he did not compare. He did not believe that you could get the same level of satisfaction, enrichment, enlightenment from video games that you could from a really well-made movie. And I don't really have an opinion on that because I've played a lot of video games, not so much recently, but as a younger person, hours a day. But the magic of movies and the way that certain movies become like old friends to us, of any genre. I mean, Terminator 2 is a lot of really bad stuff, a lot of dead people and horrible things that are done by some of the characters in that film. We know it isn't real. We love it. We feel better. We feel good at the end of that movie. The unknown road lies before us. I face the future for the first time with a sense of hope. And ultimately, movies, at their best, give us that feeling of having had a real life experience, even though we didn't have a real life experience. But it feels as if we did. Movies become almost part of the family. They're part of what makes us who we are. Hey, time for you to do a little T800 here. Don't do a T1000. So, action movies, the genre that I've probably watched the highest percentage of films. I've only shared a few. But the takeaway, which I think you get, don't let anybody tell you not to waste time on this. Try something else. You like what you like, and you watch whatever the hell you want. And if you feel like straying and watching a foreign film to see what it's like, you're going to be bored to tears. It's okay. You're not getting judged by me, and you shouldn't be getting judged even by people who do this kind of thing, have done this kind of thing, and have studied movies from eras that you've never even heard of, and filmmakers that you don't need to know about. The magic of movies is that they're accessible to almost everyone. Different generations, different years, the 90s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, 2000s, 2010s, and today. There are still great movies being put out there. I don't believe the idea that movies have gotten worse. They're different. There's so much more material out there. People used to say the TV was going downhill. TV is stronger than ever. There's so much great TV. And I would argue there are so many great movies. 2023, and I'll close on this. You look at the Oscar nominations, and I understand the Oscars, it's political, it's bullshit, that's great. You look at the Oscar nominations, and you look at the number of high-quality films that were released in 2023. It's staggering. 2023, just on that, is one of the strongest years. And I don't just mean in Hollywood in the United States and even independent films. There are strong films set around the world, like Anatomy of a Fall and The Zone of Interest, which it's supposed to be across the pond, but I believe it was funded with American money. But the idea is there is a lot of great cinema in all different genres coming out. Whether it's Wonka, whether it's Oppenheimer, whether it's The Holdovers with Paul Giamatti, which I loved, whether it's Society of the Snow, the second cinematic iteration of the story of the rugby team whose plane went down in the Andes Mountains and they were forced to become cannibals to survive. But with that, we've reached the end of episode 88 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this Thursday in New York. If you caught episode 88 on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, turn on the notifications. Or maybe you're in the car and catching up with this episode, this kind of action movie-centric episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes. Same rule applies. You like the content, click like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 89 real soon. Till then, peace.